talking about a child who's below the age of 18 years. So she was just sold. It was like selling a bag of potatoes.
He asked me for my name, then asked where I went to school and what grade I was in. He then told me that I was now to be his wife.
The charm of a golden sunrise. The village of Bazia lies in the rural homelands of the Eastern Cape. Every morning here, older men and young boys take the cattle out to graze, and those who are able to go to school will attend. But the seeming tranquility of the village belies the ugly face of a practice that is effective in enslaving some young girls. On a day that started out pretty much like this one, a young girl's life was changed completely. At just 17 years old, she was forced to marry a man she did not love. Ukutwala, which literally means to carry in isiXhosa, is a practice that is still prevalent in the village of Bazia. She was an ordinary young girl who enjoyed going to school and playing with her friends. At 17 years old, her mother and uncles decided to sell her into a marriage for 39,000 rand. She had to leave school to be the bride of a man she never met.
When I arrived at this other village where I was sent, I was asked to go into this other room. It was full of men only. I was given a skirt. Then this other man got up and closed the door. He asked me for my name, then asked where I went to school and what grade I was in. He then told me that I was now to be his wife. I was told to sit down and wait until the next day. The next day, I was told to dress like a makoti. The clothing was already bought and ready. I was then told to go to another house where I would eat utsiki, like a new bride in the Xhosa culture. I went and I ate as I was told. Then I was told to make tea.
Unlike many other young girls forced into marriage, she was rescued by the Hawks. This would not have been possible without the help of a local NGO. Khula Community Development Project, run by Petros Majola, involves protecting children's rights in rural areas. We met up with Majola to discuss his involvement in her case.
It was not easy for her to open up, given the nature of this case, where the child was not even informed about the intentions of the grandfather to sell the child as a wife. Because in this case, we cannot talk about marriage as if there was a consent between an adult and another adult. We're talking about a child who's below the age of 18 years. So she was just sold. It was like selling a bag of potatoes.
She is now in a place of safety and has gone back to school. Her life is returning to normal, but she admits that the ordeal has traumatized her a great deal. The local NGO, Khula Development Project, is also assisting her with counseling. But this young girl will probably have to relive her traumatic experience to testify against the 3 men behind her forced marriage. In a packed courtroom at the Umtata Magistrates Court, her grandfather, uncle, and the man whom she was forced to wed took the stand. While the court postponed the matter for further investigation, we spoke to the uncle outside of court.
I am so heartbroken. I thought I was helping the child. Her mother gave birth to her out of wedlock. She had more kids after that and she never married. When I looked at the situation, I asked her what we could do, and we agreed that we would marry the girl off because she was poor, and several people had shown interest in marrying her.
There are many other young girls who also fell victim to the so-called Ukutwala custom. At a school in Bazia village, we spoke to young girls who were abducted and forced into marriage. They have to act like wives, and they attend school dressed like young brides or umakoti. Once at school though, they wear their uniforms. This young girl was abducted when she was 15 years old. She says she did not want to disappoint her family by refusing to be some unknown man's wife, and says that she eventually learned to love her husband.
I was abducted and forced into marriage, and I was not the first one this happened to. In my village, many young girls were forced into marriage. It really affected me a great deal, but eventually I got used to it. I arrived there at the new home and met my in-laws. They told me that the following year I could go back to school, but I couldn't. I thought it would be a little weird that I came to school as a makoti, so I quit. But eventually I realized that there is no life without an education, so I asked if I could return last year. But now I have also given birth to a child, so I had to ask my mother to take care of the child because I really wanted to return to school.
In the same school, a number of young girls have suffered the same fate. They have tried to integrate their experiences into their lives. This young girl was abducted when she was 16. She was sold off by her older sister. Now, in grade 11, she has 3 children. In the middle of our conversation, she breaks down and she is unable to continue with the interview. This learner had a sister that was recently sold off for 40,000 rand by her own parents. She says she lives in constant fear because she does not know when her turn will come.
When it happens, I guess one would feel like a burden to their parents. Otherwise, why would it be so easy for them to just sell you off like that to a stranger? You don't trust your own parents that you live with.
The Department of Justice says while there is no criminal offense against the practice of ukutwala, the fact that young girls are abducted and forced into marriage is illegal and unconstitutional. It stifles their human rights, their chance to be children, and sometimes a chance to education. The department says marriage is a contract. It must therefore be entered into by free and consenting individuals. Where marriage or related practice is coerced, it must be punishable. The practice of ukutwala was recently thrust into the spotlight by an appeal case of Jezile versus the state and others at the Western Cape High Court in 2014.
You do not find a criminal offense of ukutwala, which is why we have the Prevention and Combating in Trafficking in Persons Act, which was passed into law in 2015, which addresses that from a legal point of view and from a prosecutorial point of view. With the case of Jezile, clearly there was rape and there was trafficking of a person because those women participated or coerced that girl into coming to Cape Town, all the way from the Eastern Cape, the former Transkei, to be raped and exploited and be opened to abuse by Mr. Jezile, which is why he was sentenced to 22 years.
Water-wise, water is an essential need. The scarcity of it could lead to loss of many lives, including livestock, plants, and much more. It requires us to use it sparingly and responsibly in times of need, failing which our taps and sanitation will not function. For more on water and weather issues, stay tuned to News Today, every Friday at 4:45 Central African Time. SABC News, making you water-wise.
Do you support the calls made by Blayton Nzimande and Soli Mapaila?
It is not a call by Comrade Soli Mapaila and the Comrade Blayton Nzimande. It is the position of the party.
Yes.
And the position of the party, we support it unambiguously.
Why?
The theory of the revolution, in simple terms, was that revolutionary forces are going to take charge of the state. And having taken charge of the state, they are going to transform the state to eventually transform society.
Join me in Port Sedu live every Monday to Thursday at 17:30.
Rights and Recourse tackles constitutional issues.
When South Africa became a constitutional democracy, we had a fairly sound legal system in place requiring the Constitution to guide the direction in which it must go and the way in which it must be refashioned.
The Justice Ministry, the custodian of human rights.
We actually have a plan to come up with a comprehensive review of our human rights instrument.
Advocates dealing with evidence.
Sometimes you have to use a crook to catch a crook. So we expected that the credibility would really be taken to task. You try and consult your witnesses and prepare them as best as you can.
Hashtag Rights with Dubila Matez on legal issues every Sunday at 2 o'clock Central African Time.
The abduction and selling off of young girls into marriages against their will is prevalent in some parts of the country. In a landmark judgment delivered by a full bench, the court heard that ukutwala is no defense against crimes of rape, human trafficking, and assault with the intent to do grievous bodily harm. Although Jezile was sentenced, we are unable to show his face as the law prohibits identifying him because his victim is still underage. The judgment was exemplary. For the first time, judges were sensitized to the harm that can be caused by a so-called cultural practice. But let us rewind to Magistrate Deline Grevenstein's first judgment, in this case in the same year at the Wynberg Magistrates Court. Jezile had been arrested because he had abducted a 14-year-old girl and forced her into marriage. He had paid 8,000 rand to the girl's grandmother and uncle for lobola. The practice of abducting young girls and forcing them into marriage is often with the consent of their parents. Following the abduction and payment of lobola, Jezile traveled with the girl from Ngobo in the Eastern Cape and held her captive at his Philippi home in the Western Cape. The court heard that during this period of captivity, the young girl was raped repeatedly. She was also continually assaulted in a bid to subdue her. But eventually, she managed to flee, making hers the landmark case where the courts had to decide on matter that was always believed to be nothing more than just a custom.
It is intolerable that very serious crimes such as rape, trafficking and assault of a child are committed under the guise of tradition, culture or religion. It has long been the position in common and statutory law, I refer to the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act in 1998, that both parties to any marriage must consent thereto. The tradition of ukutwala, where the consent of the bride was not required, has fallen in disuse by abrogation due to the often devastating effect on the victim. Hiding behind the now defunct custom to satisfy one's own selfish needs should be discouraged at all costs.
Even with Magistrate Deline Grevenstein setting the record straight and sentencing Jezile, the practice still continues in some villages of the Eastern Cape. Dr. Jadezweni lectures isiXhosa at Rhodes University in Grahamstown. He says the abduction of young girls who are later forced into marriage today is not ukutwala and should be viewed as a crime.
I think some of these practices get abused by criminal elements as well as people who do not understand the culture of isiXhosa as it is. Ukutwala, I do not have an equivalent in any other language except to say Utwala is when a marriage happens. It starts in this way, in that there are no negotiations that happen, the formal negotiations with representatives of the husband to be, going to the family of the daughter. It is usually an agreement between the two parties, the lady and the prospective husband. They will get an understanding that now we are married, we're getting married, and then they settle for that. And that is, if the lady or the woman agrees to live or to join the family of the husband, then that is quite okay, because there is an agreement between them.
Government, academics and local NGOs who deal with children's rights all agree that forced child marriages under the guise of the Ukutwala custom is wrong. Advocacy groups have also been having this conversation for a number of years. To see if people on the ground understand the law in relation to what they call custom, we travelled deep into Emampondweni, which was notorious for the violent abduction of young girls and their coercion into marriage. In Flagstaff, a village that lies on the border of KwaZulu-Natal, local resident Utatuzole Themba Bandezi agrees to talk to us about his views of Ukutwala kwabantwana. He confirms that while this was once a haven of Ukutwala, it no longer happens here. With 2 daughters of his own, he disagrees with the concept.
The issue of forced child marriages has always been a problem for me. This thing of children being forced to marry people they do not love is wrong, because it's always about parents just wanting to benefit in terms of cattle. These children sometimes end up breaking up because all of this was forced and because they did not love each other. I think this is why people no longer practice it. We have seen that it's better for children to want to marry each other.
Another resident, Umamunom Sakaleka, explains that although there are some villages in the area that force young girls into marriage, most villages do not do it anymore.
A lot of people from different areas have arrived here at our village to educate us and to teach us about forced marriages. People are forced into marriage and sometimes they are just not happy. You will hear sometimes they will say that the in-laws mistreated them. Even the person that forced them to get married also just leaves and just does not treat them right because they were never in love with him. But their parents expected them to have a wife, not because they were ready for marriage.
The move away from abducting and forcing young girls into marriage in this village signals hope for those victims who have had to endure what has been dubbed as modern slavery. Modern slavery encompasses a number of practices. According to the Global Slavery Index, these include human trafficking, forced labor, debt bondage, child exploitation, and forced marriage. The index also says that human trafficking and forced labor is most widespread in South Africa. Yet many in these villages still believe that a teenager being forced into marriage, forced to do home chores, and forced to bear children is nothing but custom.
Well, a very good morning and welcome to AM News Live at 10:00 hours across all Central Africa regions.
A fitting send-off for a revolutionary giant, a life dedicated in service of the people.
The result means that the Swallows are out of the ABC Municipal League and drop to the amateur fourth tier of South African football, the SAB League.
Tune in on AM News every Saturday and Sunday from 10 hours.
Cold weather is good news for farmers battling the fall army worm.
Soldiers of misfortune
and it has no natural combat enemy in South Africa yet.
A mother in Diepsloot is fighting for answers after a baby died at a local creche.
When they handed the baby to me, I said, boy, boy, but he was unresponsive and his hands were very cold. When I opened his eyes, I knew something was wrong.
Daycare mothers even changed his nappy and handed the already dead child to the unsuspecting mother.
Fueled by poverty, many use the early marriage of their daughters as a strategy for reducing their economic vulnerability. Many parents have left these areas to find work, and many others have died from HIV/AIDS, leaving young children in the care of their grandparents or raising their own siblings. NGOs say young girls here need to be empowered through a strong education system. The Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Act has come into effect, and hopefully South Africa will see more prosecutions. But it will take brave young women to come forward and break the cycle. While it seems like the battle of forced child marriages is slowly being won in Mampondweni, some traditional authorities feel that if they are given more power through the traditional courts bill, they will be able to protect the girls. But Chief Nonkonyana says Western jurisprudence is often at odds with African jurisprudence.
Because of this issue of the traditional courts, where the bill that is going to come to Parliament is not being passed, you see, which is a lot of frustration to the communities and actually brought injustice, because there is that uncertainty there. I don't understand why our government is reluctant. You see, we have been arguing. They say no, lawyers must become. I said, well, if there is any lawyer in South Africa that has passed Pala law, I will accept that lawyer in my court, and he or she will have to comply with it. But he said no, as if then the lawyers must be Roman Dutch lawyers, and we are fighting that system.
Gender activists dismissed the traditional courts bill for entrenching patriarchy. To them, it is the last instrument society can hope to protect young girls with. Regardless of which law applies, young girls continue to suffer. One of the young girls we spoke to at a school in Bazia says she was not abducted. Her parents asked her to marry a man she did not know. When she refused, a meeting was held between her and some elders who convinced her that getting married was the right thing to do. Eventually, she gave in.
I asked if he would not allow me to finish grade 12 before marrying me, but he said no, because he must get married and that he did not have time to wait. One thing that worried me though, and made me feel that I needed to return to school, was the fact that these people are not educated and they don't have good jobs. He works as a construction worker and he does not have money. So I thought instead of being at home and just falling pregnant, let me go back to school so that one day I can work for my children.
Some young girls who are not abducted and forced into marriage are manipulated into believing marriage is their only option. Women in these villages are expected to take care of household chores and bear children. Many feel stuck and unable to leave. As the law continues to educate society and more people becoming conscientized, what is the fate of those girls who have already fallen victim to this practice?
You can be prosecuted for having sexual intercourse unlawfully and intentionally without the consent of that person at any stage, if that person can prove that from an age point of view she had no authority to consent.
Because she spoke out against her abusive situation, this girl is well on her way to turning her life around.
I want to study and be a social worker. This idea that people have that as a woman you must marry or you are a disgrace can't be right, especially if you are forced. There are many people that are not married but are successful and independent.
These young girls now pin their hopes on government, traditional leaders, and their communities.
I don't expect a person of that age to just pick up a young girl as picking up a packet of biscuits in a supermarket, because a young girl cannot be treated as a commodity. She is a human being and she still has a right to education.
South Africa enjoys one of the most progressive constitutions in the world, with numerous organizations that work to protect the rights of women and children. Girls who are subject to child marriages do not develop to their full potential. This means that they are condemned to a life of servitude and poverty. Local organizations believe that even the recent arrests and prosecutions are just but a small piece of the puzzle.
I think now it is time for the law enforcement officers to enforce the law. Whoever is found to be implicated in a form of ukutwala, that person must face the law. That person must be arrested and denied bail, prosecuted, and of course to be sentenced. Once the justice system comes up with a very harsh sentence, then I think our people will realize that this is crime.
The Department of Social Development says it started discussing the matter of ukutwala kwabantwana with traditional leaders, schools, as well as community organizations.
It's worrying us as a department whenever there's incidences of this nature. We are depending mainly in our interventions from communities. Even in this particular case, someone made a call to say this is a particular case where someone has been abducted against her will. So obviously, if we entrench, this belief within communities first, and make them understand this is not a normality, because you've already heard even from the people who did this, for them they are totally oblivious that this is totally against the basic human right. When you take people away against their will, you have totally obliterated their human right.
As the laws become stricter and more sentences are handed down to perpetrators, sexual slavery could become a thing of the past, with young girls being given more opportunities to become educated.
Yasembono, Sizamela.